Today's podcast will cover important targets that you can reach for tinnitus relief. And if you're new here, head over to tinnitusquiz.com where you can answer a few questions and have a specific recommendation for which tinnitus solution is right for you. This podcast can help you find tinnitus relief, and tinnitusquiz.com is the best place to start. Hey everyone, this is Dr. Ben Thompson, audiologist. Welcome to the Tinnitus Relief Podcast. We're here with one of our most popular guests, Glenn Schweitzer, who is a tinnitus coach, columnist at Healthy Hearing, and author of a book about tinnitus relief. So amazing time to be here together. Keep listening to this podcast because we're going to discuss the important targets to focus on for long-term tinnitus relief, how to hold your progress with improvement and habituation. And between Glenn's experience, my experience, there's going to be a lot of wisdom and actionable takeaways from this conversation. So let's start with a quick summary of the Tinnitus Relief Summit, where Glenn presented about coping and management strategies for tinnitus. Glenn, what were your takeaways from that presentation for our listeners here? And then we'll get into these targets to focus on long-term.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Ben, it's great to be here with you again today. As always, I always love our conversations. The summit was a really interesting opportunity, and I know it had a big impact, like just from sharing the videos with my audience. I know people really responded well. Caught a bunch of the other presentations. It was just a really amazing event. I was happy to be a part of it. You know, with my presentation, I knew a lot of the other speakers were going to be talking about like research and like I know you were talking about habituation and masking and TRT and yeah, Jastroboff there. Like I kind of was trying to figure out for a while, like what would be something useful that I could add without sort of treading over any of the same ground. And so I realized like no one was really talking just sort of like maybe Julian a little bit, but like on the ground, like here's some like actionable coping strategies and tools that you can try, because regardless of how you work to habituate, and I would say there's a lot of approaches that are all potentially viable, it takes time. And so having like a lot of effective coping tools and strategies to help you to start to feel better along the way, to learn to like address a lot of like the mental health impacts, like the anxiety and like the negative thinking and the depression side of things, just actionable steps people can take and advice that people could kind of put into practice at any point in the process of habituating to sort of improve quality of life and get a little bit more feeling of being empowered to like have some control over their situation. So
Yeah. What are the questions that people typically have when they outreach to you? You know, you're a tinnitus coach, and we have tinnitus services from our audiologists. So
yeah.
we get a lot of immediate questions as well as on YouTube. What are the common questions that you get from patients who need help but are trying to figure out what they can do? Because like you said, we need help now, actionable things. I want to get help right now. I want to feel better.
Yeah. So I think that a couple things. So one, a lot of people I think are just looking for a plan. Like as I know we've discussed before, Ben, like there's the online informational landscape available to tinnitus patients is a mess. Like it's just a complete mess. There are a lot of people doing good work now and talking about habituation and keeping it very hopeful and positive and uplifting. And then there's a lot that's like really scary and conflicting, and you know it kind of makes sense if you really think about it. Like people are going through this same experience where they're feeling powerless, they're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, their quality of life is being destroyed, their doctor likely told them something incorrect, like there's nothing you can do, and so that's, you know, they feel more powerless. And then they find each other online, and it creates this picture where everything is just very scary. It's hard to know what to focus on. It's hard to know like what to choose, what to do, what path to take. And so I think a lot of people are ultimately just looking for some clarity, looking for hope, looking for a plan, right? Like just what are some steps I can take? How can I get moving in the right direction? A lot of people I find don't even realize that there is hope. And that's a big problem. And that's always step one for me. And I know we discussed that a little bit in our last podcast. There's so little hope. I often say, like, how many doctors or medical professionals have to tell you there's nothing you can do before you just give up, right? Like, why would you, if you've heard that 3-4 times, like why would you think differently, right? And that's a big problem that it got that way. And I'm finding that it seems like it's like this for a lot of health problems. It's not just tinnitus. Anytime there's a chronic condition where the answers aren't obvious and it takes time to heal, and you know there isn't just a medication or a surgery that can be offered, patients slip through the cracks. But a lot of people are looking for a plan, and so I've really tried to organize like my work around like offering like kind of actionable steps, like creating a plan. Like that's
100%.
something I offer Like I always write up notes in the form of a plan that people can follow and just put into practice. And also just kind of offering a logical, reasonable picture of the problem in a way that people can see that there is a path forward, right? I think that's like a missing piece for a lot of people, that they don't even realize that there is a path forward. And I think like, though there's some really, I think that to talk about tinnitus in a way that leaves open the possibility that like there might not be a path forward. Like I believe that everybody can work to maybe not habituate to the extent that I have, but can dramatically improve their quality of life with tinnitus, of all any, regardless of the presentation of tinnitus, regardless of the challenges, you know, whether they have hearing left or not. I've seen it. I've seen people improve their quality of life. You know, will somebody with 7 different fluctuating sounds at any one moment who has no hearing left or almost no hearing left be able to habituate as fully as somebody with like a single tone, you know, where it's where they have perfect hearing? Probably not. But I've seen people make pretty dramatic recoveries from like even like the most dire situations. And I think I try to really talk about tinnitus in a way that just makes that point always, because anytime you leave an opening to the possibility that some people are beyond help, everybody who's suffering will think that they're beyond help. Like, oh, I must be one of the cases. So
yeah, totally agree how important that is, providing a pathway forward, providing a roadmap. Sure. I had a patient who I was working with personally via telehealth, and he explained to me, he said, look, the last few months have been really tough for me, and I'm so glad that I had guidance, because even though this is the hardest thing I've ever had to go through, to know that there is a way through it, to know that if I follow a system that works for most people and is based in science, that I will experience relief. Having that light, having that guide, having that roadmap is what's keeping me here. It's what's keeping me showing up, allowing me to be with my family, to maintain my work and keep doing a good job in my work and vocation. And totally agree with you. Having hope is essential. So we want to balance this long-term, mid to long-term hope of my baseline levels will be so much better. I know that I can get better with tinnitus.
Yes.
Maintain that mid to long-term hope, while in the short term getting very tactical and using technology, using mental, psychological skills, using sleep strategies and behavioral changes. And this is where we get into some of these actionable steps. So I think the biggest actionable steps are going to be around sound therapy, sleep, and the mental, psychological piece of this, where some of the things that you brought to our community is guided breathing and meditation, along with others. So
yes.
This is a short interruption from today's video to announce the Tinnitus quiz. If you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you or someone you know has tinnitus. We know how much tinnitus can impact your daily life, and we're here to help. Visit tinnitusquiz.com and take a 2-minute quiz to receive personalized treatment plans that have helped hundreds of people learn to manage their tinnitus. Start now at tinnitusquiz.com.
Well, try to summarize. What are the actionable steps that move the needle for patients in the short term?
Absolutely. So there's a few things, and you certainly hit the nail on the head. So just from a high level like perspective, masking is super important. And I'm sure we have some differing opinions on like maybe what's the best application of masking for any one person. But I think we both agree 100% that like masking is crucial for pretty much everybody, assuming they have some hearing left. So masking, address like techniques and strategies to address mental and physical stress and anxiety. And so it's not just like, you know, cognitive techniques or, you know, like kind of therapeutic techniques, but also like relaxation techniques, breathing techniques, body scan techniques. And there's some stuff we can certainly talk about there. And then also those sort of cognitive techniques, and it's addressing both sides. And then to me, the most important element is incorporating some sort of piece where you're having like a relaxation practice. And in my work, that looks like, I as we've talked about before, I teach these tinnitus focused meditation techniques where it's very simple meditation rather than focusing on the breath or a mantra or a part of the body. I have people focus on their tinnitus, and I use all sorts of masking and tools to make this less scary than it sounds, but having some sort of practice where you're not just always avoiding it. In my opinion, like problems get worse when we avoid them. It's true of all types of problems. And I feel that in some ways it's no different from tinnitus. You have to be able to confront it, but in a very controlled environment where you're able to actually experience some sort of like, at least like a mild state of calm or relaxation. And then the rest of the time, you don't need to be confronting it. But if you're only trying to avoid it, I find that problems tend to get worse when we avoid them. So that's the three things. Those are the three most important things.
Yeah, we can address that for a moment, because if I'm never hearing tinnitus, if I'm always avoiding it, it can inadvertently train the brain that the tinnitus is a threat, or it is a burden, or it is a bother, to reach stages of tinnitus relief through the process called habituation, which everyone's brain can do and already does in other domains. We need to train the brain that this sound of tinnitus, which yes is annoying, yes is unpleasant, we need to train the brain that it's neutral, that it's not life-threatening, that it's not an imminent danger or concern, because that's why the brain is so focused on it. And this isn't just a choice, a snap of the fingers. So you can hear us talk about this if you're listening on YouTube. You can hear us talk about this. It doesn't mean that tomorrow you can snap your fingers and it will be in that state. It takes time. Tell us more about that, Glenn, of patience, time, and tinnitus as an ultra marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, I think like the fundamental problem is that, well, there's a few elements here. So first of all, a sound is just a sound, right? And I would argue that some sounds society would agree are more annoying than other sounds, right? But at the end of the day, we hear lots of sounds in our daily life that are unpleasant, that don't bother us at all, right? And so the problem of tinnitus is not necessarily the sound, though of course it is. To me, the problem of tinnitus is this the emotional and the sort of, in my opinion, PTSD-like emotional and psychological problem that develops around tinnitus. And it doesn't often develop all at once. Sometimes it does. Sometimes people develop tinnitus and it's panic from the first moment. But I find in my experience, there's a buildup, right? Like this negative conditioning happens where like, there's the immediate kind of impacts in terms of like a fight or flight or anxiety response. But then it's just like the being stuck, the feeling powerless, being caught in that situation. Like over time, like it deepens, right? Like the negative associations build, the negative patterns surrounding the tinnitus, the anxiety patterns.
Yeah. Let's talk about that term negative conditioning, because still sometimes today when I hear myself, you, others say the emotional reaction is why tinnitus is bad or loud or bothersome. I imagine that many of you who are listening think that emotions are something that we have direct control over. But I think the subtle and important piece of this is most of what our brain does for us is subconscious.
Correct.
Just like an iceberg, you only see the top of the iceberg. Below the iceberg, underneath the water, most of the mass, most of the energy, most of what's happening is not visible. Same thing with the emotional centers of the brain. And I think this is a big point, that if I have tinnitus and I'm hearing someone say this is an emotional brain problem, like I have said, you're not alone in this, Glenn, that I just wanted to expand on this, because any normal person who's experiencing this obtrusive, louder sound in their head, their brain would go into this fight or flight protective mechanism. So I just wanted to address that there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing abnormal if the brain is reacting negatively or sustaining 100%. Levels of loud tinnitus. And it's not a psychiatric problem. It's a deep emotional brain network response.
Correct. And it gets wired into the nervous system, right? So this is not some conscious choice to feel anxious or have this negative response. Nobody would choose this, right? Like the response develops as a byproduct of feeling powerless and being stuck in a state of suffering for a long time. Like these bad patterns sort of wire into the nervous system. And it's not just with tinnitus and sensory perceptions where this sort of problem and negative conditioning happens. I'm dealing with just a personal issue of like pretty severe arthritis in my big toe. And there was a point in this problem where I couldn't walk, and like your body will wire new gait patterns, new biomechanics into the nervous system to avoid pain. And it's like not just addressing like muscle imbalances, like you have to retrain the nervous system to like walk differently, right? Because your body will always just sort of find the path of least resistance. So like nobody chooses this. Nobody in their right mind would choose to react this way. This is just this very visceral physiological process occurs. And then being stuck in that state causes with good reason, all sorts of negative emotional and psychological consequences. And it just sort of all starts to become a mesh. So I look at this, I don't even think it's just fight or flight. Like, I think it starts with fight or flight, but it ultimately it gets out of control. It gets away from us and it mutates into a much bigger problem than just fight or flight. What people are left to try to unwind, and to answer your question from before, the reason it takes time is because it takes time to build up to that level of intensity. You can't expect the nervous system to just let its guard down entirely and release all of that.
When the system is out of balance, it can happen in a matter of hours or days, right? We've heard this.
True.
My tinnitus came out of nowhere, and then within hours or days, it's constant, it's loud, it's in both ears. I can't get rid of it. But the retraining period is slower and more gradual and ongoing. So if the spike of how it became loud or became bothersome happened very quickly, don't be alarmed that getting better is a more slow, gradual process.
Agreed. That's a good point to add. That's important. Regardless, and I think how quickly the problem manifests, I think that has a lot to do with personality type. I'm somebody who developed a negative response pretty fast, so there's no judgment there.
We had Dr. Jennifer Gans on the podcast, and she describes it as the amazing personality of someone with tinnitus who is hyper focused, who's an achiever, who solves problems when they come up. Usually type A. And
I see it all the time.
When tinnitus is I can't solve it myself. Doctors tell me there's nothing I can do. There must be a better way. It creates these negative loops. So
it's a recipe for disaster. If you're a problem-solving, highly motivated person who gets a lot accomplished, and then you're suddenly confronted with a problem that seemingly is impossible to solve, that you feel powerless to do anything about, that is a recipe for disaster for that type of person. And I fit that. I very much in that personality type, and struggle up against health problems in this way, right? I went through a lot of self-inflicted torment with both tinnitus and Meniere's in those early days of trying to research and put the pieces together for myself. And
that's why your mission is so well received. One of the reasons is that you can relate so well to that experience because you went through it. Let's talk about long-term relief from tinnitus, right? So yes, there are short-term actionable steps of things I can do to settle the mind, settle the nervous system, settle the body, use sound therapy, enrichment, masking sounds, white noise, pink noise, natural sounds to get our attention to shift tinnitus, use meditation, use breathing. Those are all helpful in the short and midterm. For long-term relief, let's talk about some important targets to focus on. So I think people often ask, how long will it take? When can I stop doing some of the things that I started for tinnitus treatment, tinnitus relief? And then we'll also discuss how to hold that progress. So what are the important targets? Let's say someone has had bothersome tinnitus for 6 to 12 months, and now they're looking to do something about it. They find this video or they find some resources online. I'll talk after you, but what are your important targets to focus on for long-term relief?
So you're saying, okay, for long-term relief. Well, first, if just to digress us for one moment, I want to sort of define the problem that I see and what requires the need for a long-term strategy or plan. So there's this issue, but I don't know if you call it tinnitus relapse or habituation. I tend to call it habituation relapse. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this. And where I see it most is in the case of somebody who's habituated naturally, right? Somebody who just sort of time went on, they just over time, they naturally habituated. Most people will naturally habituate. It may take a very, very long time. And I would argue you can't get to the higher levels of relief that are possible by working on this, but some people do. The problem is if something happens down the road, and life happens, you never know when something's going to happen that causes an impact on your ears, like a loud sound, an injury, a traumatic event. If it suddenly changes or they have a bad spike, that person, not only will they not really know what to do to feel better in that moment, they won't really know how they got better the first time, right? And so I've noticed that the vicious cycle can fire back up in this way, you're just starting all over again. And it doesn't need to be a starting all over again, but it can be. And it often is for people. In fact, a lot of people I work with are in that situation where they lived with, they struggled and they habituated and lived well for a long time. And the spike happened and they didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Between the two of us, we've worked with thousands of patients. This is pretty rare. I mean, if someone experiences relief, I tend to recommend that if you've held your stage 4 of habituation, if you've gotten to the place where you are habituated, and that's been consistent for 4 months,
Yep.
that's the time where it's okay to step away from some of the treatments.
Oh, we're in agreement there.
Yeah.
Oh, no, don't
sure.
get me wrong. We're totally in agreement there. And when I just wanted to preface that, like because the targets are sort of the things that I try to help people to build in the active working process so that those skills are there. So if the need arises down the road, like you have the prerequisite skills. But I just wanted to start by sort of defining the issue that of where my thinking arises for all this. So
I'm with you. I didn't want anyone who's listening to think, all this work is meaningless because I'm just going to relapse if I go to a loud concert. And I'm here to say, no. That's very rare and shouldn't be expected. But if it did happen, we have strategies.
Yeah, I think for both of us, like the goal by the end of people working with you or me or anyone on your team is to get people back into their life, like to be able to do everything they want to do and not have to do anything on a daily basis to put this all behind us. Like there's no real need for, I often recommend an ongoing practice of meditation, but not tinnitus focused meditation after a few months.
We had a patient once say that with tinnitus, after getting relief, he can live a full and productive life. Totally. And that's the message that everyone needs to hear, is that you can still have tinnitus, 100%. But live a full and productive life. And that should be the goal.
I am a testament to that. Like my tinnitus is present. It's loud. It fluctuates with my Meniere symptoms. I am every bit as happy as I've ever been. The tinnitus doesn't prevent me from doing anything I want to do. I live a full and complete life. And in the moments that it fluctuates or starts to activate me, like with some of the targets and techniques we'll talk about in just a second, like I'm able to squash that emotional response down and continue on with my life. And so like the promise of habituation, in my opinion, is a restoration of quality of life. And the sound does not need to get quieter. It doesn't need to go away for that to happen. You can experience a full restoration of quality of life, even if the sound remains every bit as loud as it was early on. And I've seen that to be the case over and over. So I'm glad you added that. So, okay. So just to kind of summarize, in my opinion, like what are the most important sort of targets or metrics or things to work on? So for the long-term prevention of relapse or management of potential relapses down the road, one is like having the right coping skills and tools that you know to be effective for you, and also like having a plan in place, like giving it some thought, like these are the tools that have helped, or the techniques or the masking or the things that helped me the most along the journey that I'll go back to if I need them in the future, like having that figured out ahead of time so you're not scrambling when the time comes. Like that's important. So just having the right skills and tools that are effective for you, and every person is different in what skills or strategies or coping tools will be most effective in their lives. So that's one. But perhaps more importantly than that, in my opinion, is confidence in your ability to use those skills and tools effectively, like confidence in your ability to cope. I think I said last time I was on your podcast, like I think that powerlessness is the root emotion at the heart of every problematic case of tinnitus. And the opposite of powerlessness, in my mind, is confidence in coping ability. Like if you feel confident that you can handle a difficult moment, when the moment comes, there's a lot less anxiety and a more ready and willing ability to just go to the tools that you know will help you quickly, right? To before the sort of this escalation of emotion can get away from, or escalation through the nervous system can get away from you.
Yeah. So it sounds like a big part of the message here is have a toolkit that someone who has bothersome tinnitus right now can use to provide immediate relief and continue to use through their habituation process.
Correct.
Until they don't need the tools anymore, but they've learned how to use them. So if they had an illness, a very loud noise event, if their tinnitus spiked, got louder for the short term, they can go back to these proven tools that they know how to use themselves.
Correct. And I'll finish that with the third most important thing, in my opinion, and this is important at every stage of the process, but it's also very important for the long-term management, is what I call speed to tools, like the ability to catch yourself quickly when any sort of difficult moment is brewing, right? Whether that's like noticing right when a spike begins, noticing when negative thoughts are forming, when you're starting to react negatively in some way to your tinnitus for any reason, learning to recognize that moment quickly and to intervene with a coping action, like as fast as possible, like so you can short circuit the emotional escalation before it even has a chance to occur, like that's another thing, like learning to be very mindful of the internal state, catching yourself quickly in a state of anxiety. And to take that even further, I have this sort of strategy that I call like response training. And it's probably CBT adjacent, I'm sure. But the idea is that just like this sort of visceral emotional response and negative response just sort of develops to tinnitus, you can develop a parallel positive coping response, like conditioned coping response. Whereas like, so one of the things I teach is like a sort of a strategy where with lots of repetition and practice, like eventually you can get to the point where right when you're starting to have a negative moment and the thoughts are forming and you're feeling that first hit of anxiety, the next thing that happens is like you just like a coping action is initiated because you've practiced doing it in that way so many times. It's similar to the idea of like basic training in the military, like, right? Like or like with Navy SEAL training, for example, they take this to such an extent where they put them through such stressful situations over and over and over again. They even force them to experience like a shallow water blackout, which is, it's not drowning, but I mean, I imagine it feels like drowning to lose consciousness underwater, right? And because like the idea is if you can meet that moment with calm, there's a good chance your team will keep you alive. Whereas if you're panicking and reacting negatively to that moment, like you might destroy everybody, right? And so there's a coping application of that sort of idea where with lots of repetition of like a specific technique, and it doesn't need to be like I teach some specific techniques that incorporate here for this idea, but really any technique can be used here. The idea is just like anytime you're starting to react in any way, even if it's just a negative thought, a moment of noticing the sound where it was starting to bother you a little bit, but you probably would have been fine, like using that as an opportunity to walk yourself through like a quick 30-second to 1 minute sort of coping routine. Maybe that's some deep breaths or some muscle relaxation, what like a CBT type technique, whatever that might be for each individual person. And we can talk specifics if you want, but with enough repetition, I've found that people can create an automatic coping response that solves the speed to tools problem. Whereas part of the reason I think I've been able to remain habituated for so long, like using these concepts and tools, it's been like, I think like 10 or 11 or 12 years for me now, is, you know, like I'm always, because I'm in years, like it's never been years since I've had to like deal with some kind of tinnitus related moment. So I've sort of been able to really maintain practice with a lot of these techniques. And that's sort of what shaped some of these ideas. But there's this way that you can approach this where you can train your nervous system to react positively when it's starting to react negatively in a way that's beyond your control. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Having a track record of tools and response techniques that we can use immediately to be proactive,
Exactly.
instead of sit back and be helpless and just watch and listen to my tinnitus over a few hours and it gets louder and I can't do anything about it. So empowerment is a big part of what we teach. Being empowered, well, in order to know what to do, you need to learn how to do it and know what actually works. So holding habituation progress is key. If you're newer to this channel, then we need to help you learn how to habituate in the first place, how to get immediate tinnitus relief. And then when we have certain thresholds of that tinnitus relief, of that habituation, then it's a ultra marathon game of bringing your baseline levels down and holding your progress. Glenn, I know that you have some work out there in the world. I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that in just a moment. I want anyone who's watching to consider going to tinnitusquiz.com, which is sponsored by Treble Health. Here on the Tinnitus Relief Podcast. Tinnitusquiz.com is a free quiz where you can answer questions and be recommended different tinnitus solutions based on your answers. Glenn, thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom and personal experience and professional experience working with tinnitus patients. Where can our viewers find your work?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that, Ben. And I'll just say, just to address just the final thing you said, which is like, yes, this is sort of like higher level stuff of like, you know, people that are actively in the process, that are seeing results. Like, I want you to know that like, there's a way that you can never have to go through this again, and like, no matter what might happen and down the road. But also those kind of targets we talked about are helpful at every stage of the process. But okay, putting all that aside, you can find all of my work at rewiringtinnitus.com. I offer like a tinnitus coaching service, sort of like tinnitus focused health coaching, where I teach all these meditation techniques and coping strategies and tools, very personalized. sort of practice. You can find all that info there. I have a book out, Rewiring Tinnitus, How I Finally Found Relief from the Ringing in My Ears. And after the summit, I made it free. I wish I could have made it free during the summit. And there was like technical Amazon related reasons why I wasn't able to align it perfectly. I'm sure with the help of that, because I mentioned that at the summit, like I was able to give away like more than 1,000 copies this time around of my book. So that was a big success. So feel free to check out my book. And also, one thing I haven't really talked about a lot lately, I have this sort of really helpful audio album that I created. It has a lot of guided meditations, and it uses an interesting technology called brainwave entrainment that can be very relaxing, much more so than just masking on its own for a lot of people. And it's worth checking out. And I made a discount code for the Treble Health community. If anyone wants to check it out, you can, if you go to rewiringtinnitus.com, you'll see Relief Audio at the top is the link, and Treble Health is the discount code for 25% off. Treble Health, one word. So if anyone wants to check it out, there's free samples. You can check all my audio work out as well. It's a lot of people use it and have found it to be very helpful in their journey as sort of a helpful toolkit. So that's all I got for today.
Thank you, Glenn. Love to have you here, and we'll have you on real soon. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Sounds great.